Hello everyone and welcome to Wowhead Weekly number 274. If you were here last week, we had a show just before the Sylvanas Cinematic was coming out. So that does mean that today we have the cinematic to talk about. So that's awesome. We also have a surprise little cutscene with Garrosh as well, which has been pretty well received actually, and it will be interesting to talk about. Apart from that, this new reset does mean that the race to world first has officially started. So that's something which is really exciting for the entire week to come and probably into next reset as well. Before we get into anything though, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Annie, or also known as Annie Fuchsia, and I do this Wowhead weekly show together with the one and only Perculia.
Hey everyone, I'm Perk. I run a Wowhead, so I do a lot of behind-the-scenes things with news and overseeing guides and features, and it's nice to be in front of the camera, sometimes with my cat Brightpaw, to, share what's been going on with the site and interesting discussion topics. So we have some interesting cinematic lore updates to discuss, as well as the Mythic World First race starting, and maybe even some hints at another Pepe plush. So
Oh
all very
yeah.
exciting news.
Indeed, yeah, the Peppa
Brightpaw was
plush
trying to eat my
tease.
arm. Yeah.
Oh, Brightpaw's like, hey,
So
I need that new Peppa plush, Mom. You
I
have
know.
to get it. Yep.
So yeah. So the Sylvanas Cinematic will probably be spending a lot of time talking about both what it means as well as like, is this narrative decision one that makes sense? Is it satisfying even if we can, connect the dots from A to B? Like, does it make sense to be told as an in-game story? But
Mm-hmm.
I think would be interesting if we start off discussing the Garrosh cinematic and discussing why that worked in spite of being low quality visually.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of like a foil for the Sylvanas one that looked very polished, but didn't seem as satisfying to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, did you want to play all of it
Play it?
first or just
Mm-hmm.
jump into the discussion? I think it's pretty short. We
It's
can just
pretty
play it.
short, yeah, so I think we could quickly play it in case people haven't
Yeah.
seen it. Yeah, let's jump straight into it.
Yeah.
They said I must answer for my crimes. Repent for my sins. But every choice I made, I would proudly make again. You will submit. I submit to no one. Not you. Not the jailer. And not that coward thrall! For the Horde!
There it was. A
So,
real case of hello, Garrosh, and then, oh, bye, Garrosh.
yeah.
That
But,
went, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think it was satisfying
It
to
really
watch.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
I felt the same. So I was I actually didn't see this. Normally, especially when we do these shows, I watch things as soon as they come out because it becomes relevant to what we're
Yeah.
talking about and things. But this one in particular, I did not actually see on Twitter or YouTube. I was playing the game myself, going through the raid, and it just popped up, and it felt really good. I think just seeing Garrosh and seeing how proud he is and how he's he wants to make it clear that he's not regretting anything, and that powerful feeling felt satisfying somehow.
Yeah, for me, I think it was a case of a show, don't tell. Um, like we don't need to read a book or have all this extra knowledge to understand Garrosh. Yes, the books deepen the connection, but I think it's satisfying because a player that has experienced past expansions would know what Garrosh is, and they could feel the tension in the cinematic without needing to have it like, you know, footnotes in a book. For example, Garrosh is yelling for the Horde, and there's the heroic music in the background, and we're like, yeah, he's a hero. But then we remember that he was the boss in Siege of Orgrimmar and didn't really value all races of the Horde, and that to me creates an interesting tension and food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have to be like, oh, well, you only learned that Garrosh, only valued orcs by reading this book. Like, you could just draw upon your past in-game experiences to understand that tension. Or, he calls Thrall a coward, and then that's bittersweet because, Thrall is all about reuniting, like, with his family, uh, in 9-1, and it's sad
Mm-hmm.
that Thrall is in the Sanctum, but he's not going to get that moment of reconciliation with Garrosh. And then you go back to Wad and you're like, like when you watch that duel of them in Nagrand and the music is really somber and Garrosh is accusing Thrall of sort of abandoning him without much guidance as the war chief, and Thrall is maybe questionably using his magic to beat him. It sort of brings back all of these unfinished, bittersweet, thought-provoking moments in this,
Mm-hmm.
50-second cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is what makes it interesting. Like it's, it works on like a very simple level that Garrosh is like straightforward and unapologetic, but it
Yep.
also makes you think about all the contradictions or um thought-provoking elements of his story without, and it's very apparent even if you haven't like, you know, read all these supplemental media things on Garrosh.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because that sort of very general, brief, the most outermost picture of it all is that he is someone who is for the Horde, of course, and that he's angry, and he's specifically talking about how he's not regretting what he's done. So even if somebody
Mm-hmm.
watches it who has no idea what the story is, they can see that this person might have done something that a lot of people deem wrong, but he is happy that he did it because he also says that he would do it again. He would make the same choices again, and I think that also kind of gives a very very strong character, personality. And I think even then, from a point of view that has no idea about anything, you would still feel like, whoa, like this character is strong, and that's pretty cool. Like, it
Yeah,
gives a very epic feeling.
like even in the one sentence where he's saying he's not going to serve anyone, and
Mm-hmm.
then he mentions the jailer, and we're like, yeah, we're fighting the jailer, and then
Mm-hmm.
he mentions Thrall, and we're like, oh,
So
like like
wait, but
Thrall's
Thrall
the
is
good guy.
good. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
to me, like that's just, I think that just encapsulates things in a very clear, satisfying manner and gets his
Mm-hmm.
character across that, you know, sometimes his goals align with us.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they really don't. And maybe
Yeah.
that's the tragedy of him, that he had the potential to be a hero, but he's blinded by his pride. And like that just comes across really well
Mm-hmm.
as a character study of him. And you didn't really need, fancy graphics. Like it would be awesome if there were fancy graphics, but you didn't really need like all these extra, special effects
Mm-hmm.
or supplemental comics or books to get the point across.
Mm-hmm.
And you do understand why he was, charismatic, on the surface. And the more you think about it, you're like, yeah, he's still really flawed if he's so
Yep.
blinded by his pride. But in the moment, you're like, the guy's killing the boss for us, and there's heroic music playing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is maybe
It's like you're
why
almost cheering for
people
him.
like maybe this is why people thought he was a good leader.
Yeah.
He had the potential, and then you poke at him and you're like, yeah, he had, he's also showing extreme, pride. And I think it's a really good way they ended his character, especially because he kind of suffered some like meandering character development, not as bad as the current group of characters, but he was like more of a gray hero in Cataclysm, and then in Mop he was like suddenly all evil, and then a lot of his WoD development happened in books. But it
Yeah.
seems at least that there was a cohesive end to his character, and you could follow it along just by remembering events in the game. And I
Yeah.
also thought it was like he ended as the pile of ash, and Varian, ended up very similar. And,
Yep.
they were like the two faction leaders, uh, in MOP. So to me, that was sort of like a parting of the ways. Like
Mm-hmm.
both characters from that era, um, are now like passed away, like in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and they met similar ends, even though they had, like very different approaches to, governing. Their
Mm-hmm.
personalities ended up being pretty different. So
Yeah, no, yeah, the ending Ash does give it a really nice touch because of that. I agree, actually. I didn't think about that, but of course, that does make it extra meaningful in a way. I do feel
yeah.
that you're absolutely right. I think the cutscene, regardless of its quality, I think some parts look very funny. Like the mouth movements when Garrosh is
Mm.
speaking
Yeah.
looks quite questionable. But I feel a little bit like if this was his way out, maybe it should have been a bit of a higher quality
Mm.
cinematic of sort, maybe a really short one, even shorter than it is now, but still high quality. I think could have been a nice ending to it because now it's some parts of it is kind of laughable because of how it looks, but
Yeah.
it still does portray exactly the feeling that it wants to. I think that's why it's been so well received and it feels satisfying. I think the sound effects and the voice acting really really puts strength in the story. But I think it would have been really cool to see it as a just a super short but actual cinematic, some higher quality facial
Yeah.
movements and things.
I mean, my guess is that they wanted to include the players in the background to show that, Garrosh is finishing off this boss for us.
Yeah,
And you need like the player tech, but I don't know. I feel like I agree. It could be higher quality, and maybe the higher quality is more important than having your character like off on the side. I don't know,
yeah,
have like
I think
Roxful or
so.
something, so like your
Yeah.
character can't get to the boss, and just have like the boss and
Mm-hmm.
Garrosh, facing off somewhere.
Yeah, especially when it's truly, if it is truly the last of him we're gonna see, then I think it would have made sense to have an actual cinematic for it, considering how much he's been talked about, even expansions later, especially because of Sylvanas, because of parallels and similarities and differences. So I think giving him a short cinematic would have made sense there.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm still happy that he, got one, and I don't think it would have made
As a
sense for
cut,
his
yeah.
character
Mm-hmm.
to undergo like the same, uh, arc as Kalthos, who was the other anima battery for Revendreth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that he met a good end, and I'm glad they didn't,
Mm-hmm.
try to like do four-dimensional
Like
chess with
extend it,
him,
yeah.
or like I don't know, like aid Sylvanas, or bring him
Mm-hmm.
back with the, I don't know, old gods. It could have been interesting if him and Thrall
Cosmic
had a yelling
Force.
match. Yeah, but I think that he was like, an ordinary guy
Mm-hmm.
who struggled with leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and tried to form these deals, as opposed to like, oh, well, like I'm now imbued with this cosmic force and I'm so mysterious. Like Garrosh's motivations were always pretty apparent, and like his anger was always, on the surface, like you could disagree with him, but it wasn't cloaked in mystery. So it was kind of refreshing to think back to all of that. And kind of along those lines, when I was rewatching the duel between Garrosh and Thrall, at the start of Warlords,
Mm-hmm.
I was just like refreshing myself. Like I was struck by all the subtleties in it. Like the music, it's like very somber piano music, very quiet. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like sort of like a painful father and son relationship. Like they're both expressing disappointment in each other. When Thrall wins, it doesn't feel heroic. And you contrast that to something like Sylvanas, where it's like very loud, orchestral music, drums, epic cosmos, and you're like, man, people were saying warlords had, orc fatigue, but like that cinematic was really very subtle and nuanced. It was a good character study, and when it came down to the showdown, the emotions came to the surface, and it wasn't about like, oh, like actually Thrall did call upon the magic of the elements to win, but the cinematic wasn't about the cosmic force. It was about the dynamic between the two former war chiefs. So
Yeah, more relatable in terms of the people, the personalities behind it. And
yeah,
now
like
that you're
we
talking
were
about it, like,
talking
I want to go back and watch it after the show.
Yeah, like we were talking about it even last week with the Tehran cinematic, how to me,
Mm-hmm.
like, what stood out the most was the moment where she's using the power of a loon, but she's also getting the edge mentally on Sylvanas, taunting her about Nathanos. Like that
Yep.
character moment was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, like you could say, like, in spite of the big special effects, or cosmic mysteries, or little hints about speculation, like the human elements, like these very real flawed characters in the fantasy setting, is I think what excites people the most, because it's
Mm-hmm.
relatable even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's. I'm glad that you reminded us of that too, because we had a big discussion on that last week, and the
Yeah.
Garrosh cutscene exactly fits into that. How it is very simple on the surface, but is very relatable because of understanding humans. It's not so much of hidden forces behind it, or some other kind of cosmic or explanation, which is more difficult to understand for more casual consumers. I think having that type of story, which is more direct, makes it easier for people who are not as invested to understand, and can sometimes even be more fun for even the people who are very invested to have those simple interactions in front of you, which are very easy to understand.
Yeah, and I think that you can still discuss a lot from it. There's still food for thought. Like, was Garrosh
Absolutely.
right in
Yeah.
thinking that he was,
You can still dig
treated
into it.
unfairly?
Mm-hmm.
Like, would him and Thrall ever have found a resolution?
Mm-hmm.
How heroic was Garrosh? Compare him to Sylvanas. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can speculate on things within reason and have fun with it, and don't have to worry as much that because you uh, didn't keep all your books straight and thought that book A was canon while book B had the
Yeah.
unreliable narrator, and like you didn't read book C yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel that at that point you're sort of going beyond what a above average fan would be doing to try to understand and appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And things can still be
uh,
discussed, like you said.
yeah,
Did Garrosh do anything wrong? Or did he do nothing wrong?
right.
You can still have a lot of fun conversations, even if stories sometimes feel quite simple at the surface of it, and
Yeah.
still having depth if you want to go into it. And that's this cutscene gives a perfect example of how that's shown to us so easily, and we're feeling satisfied watching something like that.
Yeah. So I think with everything we've said in mind as to why we think the Garrosh cinematic worked and felt satisfying, I think that we should pivot to the Sylvanas cinematic.
Yes, indeed, and it's interesting actually to put it together like that, because it does contrast in a lot of ways. The Sylvanas cinematic has a lot more information and a lot more questions too. Um,
Mm.
there's so many parts of it that we can dive into just to talk about, and the cinematic itself, on the topic of book A, book B, and book C, the cinematic about Sylvanas has more meaning if you have indeed taken your time to actually read through those books, because a lot of the things are explained and described in them.
Yeah. So we can discuss the merits of that. I mean, I think you guys know where we stand based on what we've said previously, but we can briefly recap what happens and what are some of those elements you would need the supplemental materials to better appreciate.
Wait, do we watch it
So
too, or do we?
I mean, we can. I think just a quick note on the timing. I remember last week we were concerned that the cinematic wouldn't really provide closure or be satisfying because based on the data mined run times, this was on the shorter side, and I feel like a lot of our concerns came to light when we're like, oh, it's only a 3-minute cinematic, not a 5-minute one. It's there's going to be quite a few cliffhangers here. But yeah, since the cinematic is not, in fact, that long, why don't we just play it for everyone again?
Let's do it. I think that's a good idea. In case you watched it a whole week ago, because it did come out straight after the show. Not straight after, but soon after the
It's
show.
actually a few hours later. It was like 6 p.m. and we ended at like 3:30. But yeah, let's go.
Let's go indeed.
At last, the final is once again now.
The way is open, Zobor! We already have what we need!
Too long I endured the Maker's flawed design. I will forge a new reality where all shall serve.
I will never serve.
Still chained by mortality. You did help restore something stolen from me. Alone to repay you. In kind. I leave you to their mercy. Come. Be the first to witness reality's end.
Cannot let him reach me.
There we go. Just a refresher for anyone who may have missed it or may have forgotten certain details.
Yeah. So, we can briefly go over like what happens on the surface if you're unfamiliar with the books, and then like what the books add to it, and then does it make sense? Is it satisfying? What's the questions with Sylvanas? What's up with the jailer? So, if you haven't seen any of the books, it seems like Sylvanas has a moment of hesitation brought on by the word serve, kind of similar to Game of Thrones and the bells, and seems to apparently turn against him. Unfortunately, at the moment where he's powered up and got all of his armor. So, worst possible time to realize maybe the jailer is not super helpful. And the jailer, for some mysterious reason, lets Jaina, Thrall, and Bolvar go, goes into a mysterious portal that kind of gives you Broker First One's vibes with Anduin.
Mm-hmm.
And as a thank you to Sylvanas, that's probably something, negative in disguise, restores something to her.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't read the books, when you see the blue eyes, you might think, oh, are these her high elf eyes? Did she get some missing piece of her back? A crystal was placed in Anduin's Mornblade. Um, the jailer claimed he stole something. Did he steal something important from Sylvanas?
Mm-hmm.
And then she passes out at the end, and her final words imply that it could be, I don't want the jailer to reach where he's going to go, or I don't want Arthas to reach the Sunwell. And the camera has this very interesting tilt where as she's collapsing, it also tilts so she looks like she's right side up, which I
Yep.
think is kind of like a neat visual indicator that like things are topsy-turvy, but she's also like entered herself again visually.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fun note to end it on. So you might
I
see
thought it
that
was a
and be
cool
like,
camera effect. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So you might see that and be like, I'm really confused, but I guess Sylvanas is against the jailer now,
Yeah.
and is has a personality shift of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Something magical has been added, and Anduin is you could probably debate, is Anduin getting rid of his compass, showing his loss of humanity, or is there like a coded message left behind for us?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we take the books into account, we can get a fuller picture of things, such as
Yeah.
in Folk and Fairy Tales of Azeroth. A big piece is a lot. Verisa has a dream, and it appears that she's trying to find part of Sylvanas' soul, encounters the jailer in this dream, and the basic effect of this is that it seems to be clear that Sylvanas' soul has split,
Mm-hmm.
and the good part of her soul, nicknamed Courage in the story, is being held by the jailer. The jailer appears menacing to Sylvanas' spirit, and it's strongly implied that Sylvanas should have gone to Ardenweald, which could also then explain maybe why Elune did
Why
not want
Elune
to
didn't.
kill
Mm-hmm.
Sylvanas in the past cinematic. Maybe Elune realized that there was some sort of like injustice going on, or she shouldn't die in the realm she was intended for. But that's
Mm-hmm.
an interesting bit of trivia.
Mm-hmm.
So with the soul split and knowing that Sylvanas was specifically called Courage, now it makes sense why what Sylvanas' motivations may be, and that the shard is not just some like random super blob of anima, but it's that missing part of her soul that is now restored to Sylvanas, and the Banshee Queen and the Courage elements are now fused together in Sylvanas.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes that much, much more explicit.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is also a short story from Wrath of the Lich King called Edge of Night, and that is meant to seem like the first fateful meeting of the jailer and Sylvanas, and that's how she gets the 9 that we end up fighting earlier in Sanctum of Domination. And that is when the moment of the partnership begins, so we think, but coupled with the knowledge that the jailer had stolen part of Sylvanas' soul, it makes you wonder if she was tricked all along. Like if he's
Mm-hmm.
had her soul since
Since the
her
beginning.
death at the hands of Arthas,
Mm-hmm.
how could she have agreed with all the information to help the jailer? Was she already helping the jailer for years, and he scared her with a vision of the maw to get her to, really commit to this path he needed her to go down?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that you need to take both of those pieces together, because a lot of concerns I see, people are like, well, she seemed to know what she was getting into with the jailer. In this short story, seemed pretty straightforward. But if you think that the jailer had her soul for, over a decade before that meeting, then you could wonder that maybe, Sylvanas didn't have the full all the information.
Consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two really important things. And then, of course, there's the more obvious one of her, Warcraft 3 history. And, when she was the Ranger General, because we've only seen her as the Banshee Queen, and we're now meant to believe that this wasn't her true, authentic self. The courage element has been, stolen, hidden away since, Warcraft 3. And we're meant to believe that this character we've never actually seen in proper World of Warcraft. Like this is an important part of her character. So I think more people are familiar with her in Warcraft 3 that she heroically tried to stop Arthas and was not granted a clean death. Also some parallels how she tried to shoot Arthas, with an arrow, and in the cinematic, she also tries to shoot, the jailer with
Yeah.
a similar magic arrow.
That felt so
Um,
silly, though.
yeah, I mean, it makes if you, I agree, it's silly. It's just like if I was like some academic trying to like write a paper, like connecting the dots, like a game, I'd be
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
oh,
I'm glad that you are
she,
connecting the dots for
yeah,
me because it didn't occur to me that something like that did happen. So it is probably the intention to give that slight parallel on it, which does
yeah.
make it interesting, makes me feel a little bit less bad about that scene, because that scene on its own, just surface level, was like, what is she doing?
Yeah, like I guess one could be say, oh, when she suddenly heard the echoes of Arthas and the Lich King in her head, that's when she turned on the jailer, and she was denied, the satisfaction of killing Arthas with her arrow. So, snap emotional reaction. Now she's gonna fire the arrow off at the jailer. But you need that extra knowledge to understand what they're trying to do, and then there's still the argument of like, was it successful? Because it sometimes seems that Sylvanas only like she's very like cool and collected, except when the plot needs her to do something uh dramatic, and it's not
Yeah.
even consistent if her like buttons are pushed. Like it's not like, oh, like this would have really gotten under her skin, she's gonna do something dramatic. It's kind of haphazard. Um
Because it looked like
but it
the
yeah.
arrow didn't look powerful in any way. It just looked like an
No.
arrow, and he just sort of, the jailer just caught it really easily. And it felt a bit like, oh, so now that Sylvanas is potentially, coming to her senses, becoming nicer, in a way, she also becomes dumber. Like, surely she should know that that arrow would not have worked on the jailer. Surely she probably would have realized by now that she would need to scheme something bigger to get back at him at this point. But
Yeah, and
they made it a really emotional scene instead, where she kind of just impulsively shoots an arrow.
yeah, I mean, it feels like with the constraints of the cinematic, it felt like very much like we got to get all these like plot points in. And if
Yeah.
the cinematic was longer, like maybe if we had a little flashback to the
A
time
flashback
where
would have
she
been really nice, yeah.
like a flashback to Arthas where she tries to kill Arthas, but she's thwarted by like his lackeys, like she didn't get the job done.
Yeah.
Then if we
It
saw
would
her
give
getting the
much better
arrow,
context. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and but it's still also like we don't know what her goal was. It's like, oh, I've been doing all these horrible things, and now the jailer, like, he wants me to serve. Like, I don't like this word serve. I'm gonna shoot an arrow at him. And it's like, this is what gets you to, like, change your mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Like,
it's
what
just
else does she think she was
more
doing
built
when
up.
she gave Endwin to him?
Right. To me, the pacing of it was like they were trying to fit so many, like, showy plot reveals, but a character study could have been leading up to the moment where she shoots the arrow. Like, if the cinematic was like all in her head and we see her facial expressions, and then a cinematic ends where like she shoots the arrow and he like laughs and snaps it. after we've seen like several minutes of these painful memories, I think that would have been like a more effective character study, kind of in the vein of
Mm-hmm.
Garrosh. But right now we're just like, okay, so now she hates the jailer, but she just helped him power up and she was fighting us, so why should we applaud her for shooting an arrow,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
him? Like, it just seems very selfish. Like, oh, everyone else can serve and, be miserable, but, I'm special. I can't serve. I'm amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it does also, I mean, I'm having a hard time believing that she was so blinded by the jailer, but maybe they needed more backup for that too, because if she always thought that she was the jailer's partner, um, and this arrow clearly showed they're not at the same power level, we needed to see more of the jailer giving her a reason to think they were equals. Because,
Yeah.
in the cinematics, he's always giving her orders. She's like a
Mm-hmm.
tenth of his height.
Yeah.
So like we
Yeah,
haven't
they really
really,
showed with the size too.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, the jailer has always been like, I am, evil
Above. Mm-hmm.
McEvil person, like I have spikes, no one will escape, turn and win, uh, and it just seems that we haven't, maybe that charismatic moment from Edge of Night where they form the deal and the jailer makes it seem like they have equal power, maybe that should have been more clearly expressed, because to us we're like, well, it's pretty obvious Sylvanas is the jailer's, minion, and
Mm-hmm.
not as strong and, smaller than him. And we never really saw that dynamic play out, why she would believe him. And you know maybe she overlooked some elements of the jailer because she was so desperate for part of his vision, but that's not dramatized. Like, we don't know what he said to her.
Yeah. I am starting to really feel that the feeling of the cinematics, cutscenes, and a lot of decisions based on the
Mhm.
story um, are targeting people who are invested.
Mm.
Like you said, by reading the side books, for example, but also remembering story plots that has happened years and years ago.
Mm.
Because you giving me that insight, just realizing and having the dots connected like that, makes me feel like, hey, the arrow scene actually kind of makes sense, and it feels pretty cool that they did put it there. But I think maybe it would have been much better if they had thought about coloring the cinematic properly by putting a quick little flashback just to show this is what happened before, and it would explain why she would do that now. I think that would actually be really nice for anyone who's watching or following the story, especially on the surface level. I think that would have been awesome, and I would not feel so silly about such a scene. It would feel like, well, it makes sense. This is a
I
really
think
nice
that would have
parallel.
been like the whole part where she's been fighting us, and then it's like, Zoval, why are you trying to kill Jaina, Bolvar, and Thrall? We have what we need. I'm just like, I'm so confused. Like,
Yeah.
she's been trying to kill us for expansions. Like, we open before the storm where she's fantasizing about a war on Stormwind. She's debating killing her sisters in Three Sisters. Like, now all of a
Yep.
sudden she doesn't want to kill these characters. Like, that, I feel like if we had just not had that part of the scene and instead, the jailer was, monologuing, and as he's monologuing, we see these scenes play out, like visually linking him to
Mhm.
Arthas and
Mhm.
like moments of humiliation. I think that would have been more powerful than this, like, oh, the jailer, Sylvanas is mad that the jailer is not being efficient with his resources. Like, it's just,
Mhm.
um, it just was very strange that she suddenly cares what happens to Bolvar when she was
Yep.
beating Bolvar up in the Shadowlands
Mhm.
cinematic.
I have to say that the ending scene, I don't know how you felt about it, but I felt like it was very nice visually and in a way of a sort of power power trip where you have the jailer going along with Ando and his son into this portal. I actually really like that visually speaking, and it felt satisfying in a way that they're walking into the unknown, and it made me wonder what is going to happen next. So in contrast to the Sylvana story that made me feel like, oh no, that part actually made me feel kind of excited to find out what's happening
Yeah,
next.
I mean, I think the jailer looked really awesome.
Oh yeah, with the
And
armor too.
yeah, and I think that the compass and Anduin, like that whole thing
The
is very
compass too.
interesting because, like Anduin, is he leaving us a message? Like, a compass is symbolic of, finding your path. Is he leaving it behind so we can help him, like, you know, save
Find
him?
him.
Or is it, is he getting rid of, his last meaningful,
Like
memento
humanity.
before? Yeah. And then you also think, like, he's been holding onto this compass all along. The compass, Varian held on to that before doing something really heroic. When Anduin discovered it in Legion, that led to him gaining maturity and becoming a king, and getting the blade that Varian kind of blessed him with from the afterlife. And it's interesting that he's held on to that so long throughout his Shadowlands capture. So, knowing that the compass was so meaningful to Anduin, I think was a nice detail, and kind of more along the lines of why the Garrosh story resonated, because you don't need to read a book to understand the compass. Like,
Yeah.
if you've seen Legion, you've understood why this compass is very meaningful to Anduin.
And even if you haven't, just seeing the compass itself with like a personal picture and it being dropped, that itself, even if you know nothing, still means something because it feels like something personal was just dropped, what's the
Yeah,
meaning of
and you've
this?
seen how much he's grown. Like,
Yeah.
Anduin looks very, like, young and naive, and you're seeing this, Death Knight, and it's like, Anduin, like, he's no longer a child. He has really changed since that time. So, I think before we go into more Sylvanas questions, I think we can, like, pull back and be like, so why wasn't this satisfying? Like, we've connected the dots. You said that, like, you can understand why some certain elements made sense, or are cooler, they feel less random, but is it still satisfying? Like, it feels like there's missed potential where they could have dramatized what they were going for better, and maybe you shouldn't need all these details outside of the game to understand what's going on. Maybe maybe there's too much of a mystery. Like, it seems that cinematics at some point shifted from being like self-contained character studies to these like cliffhangers, and we've had a lot of these cliffhangers in a row, and the mystery always feels drawn out. So going back to Garrosh, I feel like the Garrosh thing was satisfying because you could see the tension and the character flaws just from the cinematic and referring back to in-game. While with Sylvanas, we still don't know what her first purpose is. Now she's someone else. We've
Yeah.
had to have these 2 books to understand her. And the 2
And we
books,
still don't understand her.
yeah. Yeah. And we don't know, like, if she has her memory. Like, it's very drawn out. And we've had some cliffhangers before in the past. Maybe we didn't know all the details, but they ended, like, there was like a beginning, middle, and end with a narrative climax, and they were like self-satisfying in their own right from past expansions. Like, at the end of Legion, we didn't know why Sargeras was plunging the sword into Azeroth, but it looked really epic, and we still knew that he was imprisoned. Like, that was a good stopping point, and the pacing of it was really cool. But this feels like you need extra details to understand what's going on, and because the Sylvanas story is so controversial, maybe the story makes sense, but it doesn't feel satisfying or handled with the proper weight that it should. And I think that the cliffhangers, I think that there's too many cliffhangers. Like, it kind of reminded me of Ashara, where, like, there was a portal, and, like, someone goes through the portal, and now we'll learn what happens at the other end of the portal in the upcoming patch.
Yep.
And, Jaina is still present in both of these. So, yeah. And,
Yeah.
I think we could also talk about Sylvanas a bit, because, I touched upon this, how, like, like, maybe we understand the story beats now, but is this like the right story to be telling, like, or is it told the proper way? Because to us, it seems like she's cold and calculating until she needs to do something like very emotional. And they seem to do that a lot with their female characters, like, Tyrande is, the ruthless night warrior, and then like she gets really angry. Or, Sylvanas gets really mad at Sourfang, gets really mad at Dalaran. Like, she has these she's only mad when the plot needs her to be mad, but the rest of the time she's like a 5D chess master. You know?
5D. Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not even consistent. Like, at the end of Shadows Rising, when Thanos is like, we failed, she's like, I don't care, like, I'm off to, do my jailer stuff. So it's not like failures set her off no matter what. It's just when we need to have that dramatic plot moment, then she's set off by some, minor
like almost
setback.
feels a bit forced. Like
Yeah.
emotional moment, like switch it on, like she was being strangled by Tyrande and barely being scared, and realizing that Tyrande is now getting weaker. She, put on her sly face and was kind of making fun of that, and then just kind of disappearing in smoke. And I think that is very nice characteristically for Sylvanas, but it does sometimes make it confusing when she does have her moments of throwing a emotional sort of random action.
Why is Tyrande strangling her, like, whatever, but Sourfang getting like one cut on her so upsetting when she knew that she could just like obliterate him? Why? It's just like, oh, because we're, at this point in the cinematic, Sylvanas needs to reveal herself, so therefore she'll have a dramatic reaction.
Yeah.
While in the Tyrande cinematic, she needs to escape and, survive until the raid.
And we talked about this before, even before we saw the cinematic. This whole idea of being able to explain all of her actions as well to a single point of she wasn't herself, that also can make it unsatisfying, I think, for a lot of people. I know that some people are pretty happy with this explanation to things, but I think a lot of people have also felt very skeptic about it because it kind of nullifies everything that she's done, because, well, she wasn't herself. She wasn't herself. But what about this thing, this many years ago? She wasn't herself. And then it kind of makes everything feel a bit pointless. And I think that's also in contrast to Garrosh's cutscene that we saw, which was him living up for what he's done and not regretting it. And I think we're getting the exact opposite action from them, which makes them feel so different.
Yeah, and I mean, with Sylvanas, they purposely set her up to be controversial, and it's inspired a lot of strong emotions where some people say, she is making tough choices, and, I support her. She has to, do the unpleasant thing to get stuff done, and then you have other people saying, you've made her into this horrible person, and now her personality is gone. Like, who can answer for her actions? So I think both people on both sides feel a bit let down, or they want a character brought to justice, or they were super invested in this character's action. That character is essentially gone now.
Yeah,
and
like there's no meaning behind it.
And even, for someone like me, obviously I think the whole Teldrassil story was pretty botched, but I was, drawn to Sylvanas' early story of, someone that was put in a bad situation and, tried to, scrape by and, became this leader of the Forsaken. Like, it's something I think people can resonate to, trying to, claw back out of something really unfair and, like, finding your own community or happiness in a way. And, it was even to the point where at the end of Wrath, when we had to, put in bids for what, like, Shadowmourne item we wanted, I'm like, oh, I want the Sylvanas music box. Like, she's the coolest character out of the bunch. Yeah. And for those people that liked that, early vision of Sylvanas, they're gonna be thinking, wait, was she under control of the jailer then? Like, was that part of Sylvanas not really her
Mm-hmm.
as well? Like, like that was a very compelling part of her before she started doing like, truly horrible things. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, where do we stand? Like, so the real Sylvanas was someone that we met for, a campaign in Warcraft 3, at the
Yeah.
very start before
Like
Silvermoon
we've
fell.
never known her.
Right.
And how
So,
how how much was this taking over her? And I guess that's the part where things can become a little bit nuanced, and maybe the story can save itself, because maybe there was still a lot of thinking behind it, and not just completely. Because that's kind of what I'm worried about now, that the story will unfold in a way where Sylvanas is very confused and very not really knowing what exactly happened, and maybe questioning her own actions, like I don't know why I did that. And I don't know, maybe some people would see that as a good redemption arc in a way, but it just doesn't feel satisfying.
yeah. So, two thoughts on that. One thought was, I wonder, there's this book coming out. I wonder if they'll try to explain it away as, Sylvanas's will
Yeah,
was
there
so
is the book too,
strong.
that's
She
true.
was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like she was off leading the Forsaken and relatively thriving, and the jailer had to like really scare and trick her into agreeing to this, with this vision of hell. Like, like Sylvanas wasn't following the path he wanted, so he forced her down it more, and then that's when she really, kind of lost her personality. Um, and like, maybe early on, uh, the Banshee Queen was still like pretty strong and out of reach of the jailer, and he, kept pushing her down the way, so she got like more lost over time. But the
Mm-hmm.
second thing about not being satisfying is that um they Blizzard purposely took a really strange drastic angle in developing her character since the jailer. Like they said, they used the word genocide. um
Did they use it
they
themselves?
memed yeah, like it was in in
I
the
thought that's a
books. It was
community
like,
thing. Okay.
no, that was like, the word genocide was in the book. They're like, the genocide of the night elves, they've nearly been wiped out. Like, like they
Mm.
chose to have Sylvanas do this very drastic
Questionable. Mm-hmm.
war crime. It wasn't like, oh, she's, you know doing things on a smaller scale that are really off, like, hating her sisters, or, you know threatening Sourfang. Like, they went to this place, and now the story is, this character committed genocide, and then this character no longer exists. Like, that's a very weird, bold story choice to go
Yeah.
down. Like, it makes the genocide feel like a shock and like awe marketing campaign that's, not going to be treated with proper nuance, because hey, the character who did it, like,
They didn't
was,
mean it, so you know.
yeah. And then that, if they're trying to say, oh, Sylvanas was manipulated or coerced by the jailer, they chose to have her do really horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
And in the cinematics, she's smiling, laughing, taunting Dalaran, monologues. There's not much sense of anguish, like she's struggling for control of herself, or is, doing a horrible thing, but, hoping that it eventually ends. Like, we saw a little bit of her facial regret with turning Anduin, but that was about it. Like, she looked pretty excited about Teldrassil, and it feels kind of cheap to be like, oh, we tricked you all along. Don't you feel bad for thinking that, she was evil when she just was, not herself? Like, I don't think tackling the really weighty subject lines of, genocide and, like, abuse or manipulation or torture, I think Blizzard has handled these very difficult topics in a way I'm kind of uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. Is there? Do you think there is any way at this point to make it still feel meaningful? Uh, can we witness Sylvanas being so regretful that she somehow sacrifices herself?
Oh, the
Or
Kerrigan storyline. um,
or punished forever, maybe the new Lich King or something. Do you see anything like that happening, which could feel like, okay, at least she's been punished now?
I mean, I think a big part of the story in Shadowlands is about forgiveness. Again, going back to the book, there's another book where we mentioned it, how like Uther encounters this vision of a character that's an allegory for Arthas. And it's like there's a jousting tournament, but the maiden turns into a monster that kills knights, and Uther is the only combatant that tries to approach the monster with caution and like compassion, and is the only one that succeeds. Um, and there's like a fateful line being like, Uther, remember the story, in the future at this fateful encounter, and the story ends with like, but he didn't remember. So I think there's something to be said where, Tyrande should not want vengeance. The Night Warrior shouldn't consume her. Um, Uther in the fairy tale chose compassion and was successful. He chose vengeance, throwing Arthas into the pit. That was not good. So I think that maybe Blizzard is trying to build up to, you know, you vengeance for Sylvanas won't get people anywhere, and if all these characters were manipulated by the jailer, maybe we can break the cycle by, I don't know, being compassionate to them somehow. I mean, it does. Like I said, it's a very strange story to be like, oh, we're going to like, you know, genocide, but then be like, not really genocide, and then maybe the character used for genocide can be forgiven.
Yeah.
It's a very questionable turn of events, but I could see something to the effect of, you're all saying you should have treated Arthas with more compassion and tried to stand by him. Maybe that could have changed things. Sylvanas was also, controlled by the jailer. Maybe, we can't change what we did with Arthas, but maybe you can react compassionately to her and go more for justice for her instead of vengeance. So I could see Sylvanas ending up in like a parallel role to Illidan as like a warden of the Shadowlands. Maybe Sylvanas becomes the new arbiter. Because there is no arbiter right now. The cycle of life and death is disrupted, and that could also be poetic justice if Sylvanas is talking about the Shadowlands seeming unfair or sorting people into the wrong place. It could be interesting if she is the one that is sorting in the Shadowlands, and can shape that in a more positive way.
Yeah.
And then we could have like a break from her, similar to Illidan, but always this idea that she could, come back in the future. But I think also a lot of people are just fatigued with Sylvanas's story.
Yeah, it's been
So I
drawn
think
out
that
so long.
I don't want her to come back and then it's like a political struggle with like her versus Talia Menethil for Undercity. I just think it would be interesting
What's
to
Tyrande gonna say?
yeah. Like it's just if
Yeah.
I think there has to be some rebuilding. But yeah, I think sort of the only sort of satisfying outcome for Sylvanas would have her be in the Shadowlands and able to implement some of her changes as to what she thought was unfair, in a positive, less destructive way than what the jailer wanted.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe she got what she wanted all along. And yeah, I think maybe that's where it could go. But like there's just a lot of questions, and it's built on a kind of controversial plot skeleton so far. And it's funny because like I do think that there has been fatigue with her, but I also think that give it your fair shot. Just give us the cinematics showing her character transformation. Give us the flashback cinematics. Just try to do the story
full
properly
story, yeah.
in game before you bring it to a conclusion. Like stop with the mysteries. Like, show us the confrontation in Edge of Night with her and the jailer. Show us why she believes the jailer.
Mm-hmm.
Give us an Arthas flashback where she's got Arthas on the verge, ready to be shot. Like, show us those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe show us like something behind the scenes during World of Warcraft where she's about to do something bad but is like actually looking conflicted about it. Just show us more of those things. Like, give us a little Jaina quest line in 9-2,
Mm-hmm.
like Jaina did with Juris, and then maybe her actions would make
More
more
sense.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because like right now there are just so many questions, and I think people just when you're reading a story, it can't just be question upon question. It's hard to get invested if there's so many twists in it.
Yeah, because eventually
Um,
you just get annoyed. Like you don't
yeah,
want you don't look forward to the next one because it feels like, well, I'm only gonna be faced with even more questions. So what's the point of following the story? So I think
yeah,
it is indeed important to sometimes just sit down and give some answers. If
yeah.
there's
Like
parallels,
going back
don't do
to
it
why
secretly. Show
like
it.
why I was so like I wouldn't say like, super invested, but like I thought Sylvanas was cool because like I could just summarize why she was cool in a sentence, and it's like I know she'll do things I disagree with, but she was put in a bad situation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's cool to see her in charge of her weird undercity, trying
Mm-hmm.
to get some respect, and it's really sad that her sisters
Mm-hmm.
don't want to see her, and like it was an understandable character. And now it's like, oh, like she was with the jailer secretly, or like she
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do something horrible, but not as horrible as the jailer. Like, it's just all of these twists that it's hard to relate to. Like, I have a lot of questions as someone who's read all the books, and it's like, you know, how could she serve the jailer and not realize it was horrible until now, especially because you know, she says the word serve a lot. Like,
Yeah.
she's totally fine having other people serve, but why not her?
Mm-hmm.
Um
She forced
like,
Anduin to serve.
yeah, she was talking about how in Three Sisters, my sisters won't die today, but they will serve death eventually. They will serve me. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you want to say that maybe Sylvanas was like desperate and tricked by the jailer into um partnering with him, or she didn't realize that he was evil, or she put some things aside because she was so desperate for change. Like, it's the serve, the word hinging her change around the word serve. um it's just strange. Like, if she's comfortable forcing that dynamic on others,
Yeah, but not on
why
herself.
is
Mm-hmm.
it so shocking to hear that applied to herself? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I sort of said it was a Game of Thrones moment, how Daenerys with the bells, you're like, really? This is what, sent you off on this, spiral? Like, you heard something? Like, it's like this sound cue that just makes your personality do a change. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems that people are saying, oh, maybe in the books, this could symbolize like a moment of frustration if there were all these other characters and subplots that were cut. And it's sort of a similar thing, how we needed more background to understand why that set her off, and we don't get that in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or maybe serve was the wrong word. Maybe if we had those extra few minutes, maybe the jailer could have said something that paralleled the Lich King that wasn't, just the word serve. But if we had that minute of flashback beforehand, we could be like, oh yeah, like that's the same line the Lich King said. Like, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why she's,
Maybe it's part of their
angry.
pact as well.
Yeah,
Maybe he had promised that people would serve her, but then she
yeah.
realizes she's serving.
Or we could have a little cutscene, where a flashback to to Edge of Night, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe the jailer is like, "Oh, Sylvanas, like, you know, my means are questionable, but you know, we will get there eventually. Like, you will serve nobody." Like, maybe we needed
Exactly.
that spelled
Yeah.
out
Mm-hmm.
explicitly as to why she was so upset by this concept of
Mm-hmm.
uh her having to serve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, you know, I just really feel we need to know what happens in Edge of Night, because we also we don't know what happened when she met the jailer in that short story. And I do believe that story was retconned a bit, because the jailer is not mentioned explicitly as a jailer in the story. We learned about that at a BlizzCon years later.
Oh yeah.
So, like, I want to know exactly what was said that got her to agree. Because now I'm wondering, like, can we even take the story at face value? Like, she thought that she was sent to hell and wanted to do everything to not, you know, go to hell, but was the jailer, now we've learned that the jailer could have been holding onto her soul already at that time. Like,
Yeah.
did he see her soul descend and was like, oh, I'm going to pretend that she's in the maw to scare her into agreeing with me? Like, it just raises more questions about this short story. And that's like layers of meta analysis. It's not like, oh, read the short story to
Yeah.
understand. It's like, well, read the short story and
To have
now
further questions.
wonder, if the mysterious narrator, aka the jailer, was tricking Sylvanas even, in this moment. And I just sort of want answers to some of this stuff already. Like, the speculation should be fun, like, it's nice when you can do an analysis on Wowhead connecting the dots, but just from like an Everman perspective, it's just like a lot of information to
And dragged over years as
process.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's dragged over years and keep getting new information, which keeps making us ask more questions. And especially with Sylvanas now also being so controversial, I think people just want some answers at this point.
Yeah, like when I first read Edge of Night, it was part of a series of faction leader short stories going into Cataclysm, showing how the world was changing. And, this was years ago, but I remember being left with, a sense of sadness. The emphasis was on, Sylvanas wanting a peaceful end, instead being sent to hell, and trying to avoid a horrible fate for herself and the Forsaken, and kind of ironically, with the silver lining, finding the sisterhood of Valkyr along the way. And, the story ends where she has this Valkyr, and, she's ready to advocate for the Forsaken. And, like, you do feel sad for her, being like, she could, like, she has no alternative. Like, she will just have this life of torment, which is really unfair for her. Or she, has to fight for the Forsaken, so they don't have similar ends, but, she has this, like, weird found family of Valkyr now. When I read that, I wasn't like, oh, who's the jailer, and is this the cosmic force, and, well, what are they
Yeah.
going to do in Azeroth? Like, that was not the focus of the short story at all. So I do think that they're suddenly putting more emphasis on this short story, but you needed a cinematic to really juice it up, or emphasize the things that were left out of the story, make it clear if the jailer was tricking her, what the bargain was, what was this magical pact they had. It just wasn't super clear in the short story. So
I think it is cool that the
yeah.
connection does exist because the book is so old.
Yeah.
So having that is pretty cool. It's like coloring a picture outside the box in a way. But I think at some point it's time to tie things together, like you said. So it's time to, potentially put that into some kind of flashbacks, so we can see what actually happened. More information, because now it's relevant.
Yeah, like if it's so important,
Yeah.
if it's like, well, there's this book that you needed to read, and we didn't
and
really
it's shaped the
emphasize.
entire life of Sylvanas,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah, we chose to focus on the Valkyr and Hell and a mysterious character, but this character was actually the jailer, and he's the villain. And like, he was so charismatic that Sylvanas, agreed, and she got this special magic power from him. Like, this needs to be dramatized, and like, we still don't know what broke the Machine of Death. We just know it was sometime after Legion, so it's like we don't know what Sylvanas wanted, why the jailer convinced her, what broke the Machine of Death and really sped things up, if he held onto her soul since Wrath of the Lich King, or when she died at the hands of Arthas. there's just a lot of questions, and I think people just, want some answers, because maybe they thought things would be faster with COVID if COVID wasn't a thing, but it just feels like the plot is just moving along at such a glacial pace, and our characters, it's not like classic where like your character creates the narrative where it's this open world. Like, you're just watching Sylvanas,
Do
destroy
all these
things on a
things.
cosmic scale. So it's like, you
Yeah.
want to know what happens next. Like, it feels
Mm-hmm.
like we're watching a Marvel movie, but we're waiting like
It's in slow
years in
motion.
between
Yeah.
movies. Yeah.
You are right, though. I think the whole COVID thing with the patch in general being so late, I think that definitely does add on to the story, feeling even more dragged out. So that is a good point to make. But yeah, still, doesn't take away from the fact that we can, it's time to pull the strings together and connect some of these stories.
Yeah, so I hope what comes next for Sylvanas is just more answers instead of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Even the way she collapses, it leaves more questions. Like, will she help us? Does she remember her past? How is she going to react? How will the faction leaders react? Like, what I don't want to have happen is, I don't want, you know, Sylvanas is chilling in Orbos. Tyrande comes up and yells at her. And then, oh, grats, Tyrande is now, the 10.0 villain. Why didn't Tyrande just,
Oh
embrace forgiveness?
no.
Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, now
Now
Tyrande
everyone
is
has
pretty
forgiven
stupid.
Sylvanas. Come on,
Yeah,
Tyrande.
and if you don't, that's bad. Like, I remember, in MOP, everyone was like, hey, Jaina, like, you're acting really angry for having Theramore bombed. Like, Jaina, calm down. Like, why are you so crazy? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, because this horrible thing happened to her city. So I just hope they don't go through this cycle of, uh, woman expresses emotion, but it's like bad emotion, and now she is the evil person, or just,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, like, Tyrande has every right to be upset, and we never really see, like, the refugees from Teldrassil are still in Stormwind. It's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
her people are growing, are thriving
Mm-hmm.
again.
And it kind of takes us
Um,
back to all the way back when Tyrande asked Anduin for help to
yeah.
to avenge her people because she never got it. They never, as a team, went against Sylvanas properly until now. And
Mm.
if now the result is, hey, we're actually gonna forgive her because it wasn't really her, then it feels bad.
Yeah. So I hope they handle that with some delicacy. I know with the Garrosh trial, they stuck that whole trial in a book called War Crimes. Um, so I don't know. I mean,
Mm.
hopefully we don't get another book, because I feel a lot of people don't know what happened in the Garrosh book, and WoW was more popular at that point after MoP. Like, some serious shit goes down in that book. Like, he escapes. Um, Jaina nearly dies again. Anduin and the Celestials kind of have to bring her back to life. Like, like, a lot of dark stuff happens in that novel.
Mm-hmm.
Sylvanas tries to meet up with Verisa, plans on killing her so they can live together as
Mm.
undead.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's just a lot of things that add to the general storyline that you don't really uh get in game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone's like, "Oh, why is Jaina so angry?" And it's like, well, she had this murder attempt on her in this book, so
Yeah.
no
Mm-hmm.
wonder she's very skeptical if, after she explains the trauma of Theramore in a trial, she then, you know, nearly gets assassinated. Like, that would
Yeah.
be, you know, that's a pretty bad combination.
I think these really
Um,
important events should definitely be in the game itself.
yeah.
I think certain books, certain stories could be in the book where they don't really affect the storyline. So, fans who want to just read more for the sake of reading more in a way, just to for more depth, perhaps, which doesn't
Mm.
affect the plot much. I think that should probably be in the books, but not these important things that affects a character's mood, a character's decisions. Um, I think it is indeed wrong to put them behind books because it makes it harder for people also to understand and follow what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even thinking back, I think stuff like Chronicle is fun, or most of the folk and fairy tales of Azeroth, but I would have probably handled folk and fairy tales by not putting the Sylvanas story uh in the book, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that revealed too much of the plot, and instead I would have put that as a free short story on the Blizzard website, so everyone could read and understand what was going on. Similar to how they did the short story explaining why like Nathanos changed his why he got his new appearance. I think that if the short story explains the concept of a soul so much and it's so integral, I think that should be something that is promoted more readily available to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Or a book in the game itself, like a short quest
Yeah,
line with a book in game, so you can take part of it in game instead.
yeah. I mean I think that could be interesting. Have like a book, you could even read it in game as a book if they don't have the resources for a quest. Like have a little book pop up in the Dalaran library, and you click it and you read the short story in game, or have like
Yeah,
an achievement for it, like
yeah,
collect the pages or something of the book.
yeah, indeed.
Um,
And then put together, and then you can read it to be a full on story. That would actually be really
yeah,
cool. Mm-hmm. Like in the game itself.
yeah. So I mean, I just hope they do the story justice. Maybe I'm kind of hoping that Varisa could be involved in like a 915 for Sylvanas, because she's the sister that had the vision of Sylvanas's soul,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of strange that we haven't really seen her for much of Shadowlands. Like we know Ilaria is busy helping rule Stormwind. But it's like Varisa's just chilling in Dalaran, and she had that strong bond with Sylvanas in the other book. So maybe Varisa could kind of be a key towards guiding her through this. But I just feel that it's been kind of a very risky story for Sylvanas so far. It's been a few years since Teldrassil. Everyone keeps saying, "Oh, it's going to have its proper payoff," but I think I'm just a little skeptical with how I don't think they've handled the genocide arc well. Like, like there's the memes, there's the pop-up book
Yeah.
where Teldrassil on fire. The people who work on the book, made jokes about it. It's like Blizzard is trying
Mm.
to have its cake and eat it too. Like they're trying to be like, oh, we're all a prestige storyline, and they're like, let's make, Sylvanas, murder jokes, or, we want
Yeah.
Sylvanas to be like, evil, weird, sexy genocide person, but also, redeemable. Like that's not her. It's like they're trying to just handle very dark topics in two different ways.
Yeah.
So, you know,
So not
I
handled
think
properly.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be interesting to see if my predictions are right and if they like continue with the story in a certain way, but I'm just a little worried how they'll if they'll do a good job connecting the dots. Because I don't know. I think they had a really easy angle to take, where maybe Sylvanas does something questionable due to her like love or protection for the Forsaken, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like building upon Legion, but they deliberately went down this like fourth war genocide route, and like it's just
Yep.
really hard to tell the story and get yourself out of that corner. So
Yeah, especially because it felt so random even at the time. So it's been an ongoing question of why was that necessary, and if it wasn't so if it wasn't so weird even at the time, if at the time it was like, yeah, well, of course, she did many crazy things, this makes sense, then maybe there wouldn't have been that many questions. But because even at the time, people were questioning, like, why did she do that? That felt very sudden, felt out of character, even. Um, to then let the question drag on for years and years, to then explain, well, actually, she may have been missing a part of her soul, which means that she wasn't really herself. And then with further questions, well, when was she herself?
yeah, and I maybe it's like it was just too late to turn things around. Like the plot points were set in motion, they work on multiple expansions at once.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can look back and say, oh, they plotted some seeds in Legion of Vol'jin being influenced to
Yeah.
appoint Sylvanas, but like Legion to me struck a balance of having some cosmic elements, like Argus, but a pretty compelling story. Uh and it was like very universal, easy to understand, like a clear threat. We brought back, some fan favorite characters like, Illidan, Turalyon, Anduin got some character development. Like people just had a lot of fun with Legion, and you could speculate on some interesting plot points introduced in Legion, but you could also just enjoy it purely in game, more on that, like Garrosh level. Um, or Argus had like cool cosmetic factors, but you could also be like, we're going to the homeland of the Draenei, like that's so cool. Like Velen gets a moment in the sun, and you didn't need to read the supplemental book to understand the mechanics of time travel or the spaceship. It added stuff, but you still were like, this is a
It
cool
was, yeah,
place, like.
it was still
And
understandable.
so it's like how do you go from the Legion style of storytelling to uh BFA that took a very different tone. Like maybe at that point it's like, well, we've committed to you know Shadowlands having this Sylvanas confrontation and needs to be built up in BFA, and you can't turn the ship around when like all the patches are planned out. So maybe people are just kind of like, oh god, like we're finally getting towards the end of this planned arc, like we can't wait to move on and go to something else. But I just hope they
Yeah.
go back to more Legion style stories and less like cosmic elements, because they're very unfamiliar. And we've been saying a lot that WoW works best when it's the character moments in the fantasy world, not like you need the cosmology PhD to understand like why these forces we've never heard
Yeah.
of before are flinging magic shiny effects at each other.
Like why they have a purpose.
Yeah. Um but yeah, speaking of cosmic elements, why don't we talk about the jailer a bit, because you were saying you were more hype about the jailer cuz like he looks cool and he was, going off through this portal, with Anduin as his son. So yeah, why don't we talk about him a bit? Um
Yeah, I think that's a good start point because I did feel that his part of the cinematic actually was really cool. He is finally full or complete, I guess is the better way to describe it. He's got his armor. He's looking very, very strong. And he also managed to make Sylvanas' arrow look like child's play. And he even is nice enough to give Sylvanas a part of her soul, perhaps, back to her. And then he just grabs Anduin and walks into the portal. Like done deal, you
yeah.
know. I'm chilling. I'm strong, and I am doing my job well. I am not regretting and being confused. I'm just doing my thing, and I'm done for now. Bye.
Yeah, so I think giving the soul back is really interesting because it sounds like he's doing Sylvanas a favor, but it could also be a real emotional downer for her if she's doing all these she did all these horrible things. The incomplete part of herself even realizes that the jailer is wrong. And she feels like she's failed and not gotten what she's wanted. And now she gets this whole other part of her soul back, and it's like intense feelings rush and guilt. And now she's stuck, with
Yeah.
this knowledge that she was manipulated. Like she's going like, I will never serve. Now the jailer's like,
Oh,
okay, well
you've
I'm
been
gonna give
serving for
you,
10 years. Yeah.
yeah, like now you're going to feel even worse about how much you've been serving. Um, so like he totally wants to just shatter the illusion, keep her behind. And I think it also shows the power difference. Like she's calling the jailer by his first name. He never calls her Sylvanas. There's the height difference. There's also not only the arrow, but it's also the jailer just views her as really insignificant. Like, he thinks that she's going to be giving her soul back. The most important element is how cruel that is. He's not like, oh, she's gonna do something important against me. Like, that
Yeah,
doesn't
he's
even
not
cross
even
his mind
scared
because
of her. Yeah.
no.
Like if he had any kind of any suspicion or thought that she might hurt him, he would just kill her there on the spot. But instead
Yeah.
he lets her live, doesn't even look back, and gives her her soul back on top of it.
Yeah, I wonder if she's gonna hold on to the magical powers with the jailer or not.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if they've if you know the pact is now broken,
Mhm.
she has her soul back, like will she still, you know, is he taking the death magic away from her? You know, if the bargain is complete, is she
Mhm.
more mortal again?
Mhm. Yeah, we don't really know
So,
what it means for her. We see that her
yeah.
eye color changes and a potential change of attitude or mood, but we don't actually know.
Yeah. So it's you know, I think the jailer looks visually awesome. I
Mhm.
would just counteract and say that I'd still like to know a little bit more about what the jailer is trying to do because
Mhm.
um he looks, you know, like he's really powerful and in charge, but I think we also need more emotional build up so he feels like more of a compelling villain. Like, you know, if we read the Tazavesh book, we get a sense that he wants to, you know, go to this, you know, kind of like a place of the first ones and, you know, unmake the world, you know, shape it in his image.
Mhm.
But he's been very shadowy, and again, we did not see what that deal was between him and Sylvanas.
Mhm.
And I think that you need to understand a villain's motivations uh, to understand why they are a tragic character.
Mhm.
Like, you know, we saw with Ashara, you know, she made this choice to save her people, and then we had several cinematics of her in Najatar. You know, Garrosh, we saw his descent into corruption.
Mhm.
You know, like a lot of Illidan,
Like
you
we
know, we
don't know
have all
much
this
about the
backstory.
jailer. Mhm.
Yeah, like right now we're just like, okay, he's like a very big guy that will do, you know,
Mhm.
bad things. But you know,
Mhm.
it's the hints we do get. It's like, you know, the jailer thinks he was unfairly banished. We've been taught to view everything as morally gray or two sides. You know, maybe the Shadowlands isn't a great place. You know,
Mhm.
Kyrians are pretty messed up. Like, you know, it's if anything, it kind of makes you wonder if the jailer is, you know, doing something bad for a greater good. So I think I don't know. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously the Anduin stuff makes him look evil, but I think we just need more emotional investment in him because
Mhm.
he is a new character
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
we haven't, you know. And again, show not
Mhm.
tell. Like we've learned now that the jailer was trying to, you know, use the dreadlords to create all these
Mhm.
battles, but we're told that we're not seeing it.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's definitely done by purpose to have some
Yeah.
mystery around the character, which I don't
Yeah.
mind too much at this point. I don't feel like his story has been dragged, and
Mm.
it's still relatively new for us to even know about the jailer, to see the jailer. So I think it's kind of okay. I think we have been hinted at certain things that gives a little bit of perspective. For example, the sigil is that because they talked about the different covenants having these sigils, and they said that he was banished because he was trying to steal or something. But then now the question is, now that he got it back, he does he specify? Does he specify himself that he finally has it back or something? There was something to do with the story that made it sound like maybe this was his to start with and it was taken from him.
Yeah. Well, it's also like he basically just consumes the Arbiter and then he gets his armor, and the empty chest cavity is now very full and
Mm-hmm.
glowing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you could speculate that maybe he was the one sending souls to various realms, or he was abusing that, or wanted to do more.
Mm-hmm.
So they took something from the jailer. Um, like the Arbiter was kind of like housing this thing the jailer originally
Yeah.
had.
Yeah. And
And
then.
he,
Mm-hmm.
when he gives the soul to Sylvanas, he's like, "Oh, like you helped me get something back that was stolen. I'll help
Mm-hmm.
you." So it implies that the Arbiter's essence was taken from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's really interesting because that kind of implies that the others in these powers have abused him in a way. They have, maybe incorrectly punished him for something that he wasn't meant to be punished for, and maybe they made him the bad character that he is. I mean, hopefully it's not a case
Yeah.
again of like, well, he's not being himself.
Right.
But I think it's
Yeah.
nice to see that perspective too. That there's more to the story, and he's just trying to be himself.
Yeah. So I would have liked a little more exposition. Like I think that you're right. It's good that his story hasn't been dragged out. But when you have the mystery of the jailer on top of like the mystery of
Yeah,
Sylvanas,
yeah, yeah.
there's just a lot. Like I would have been okay if there was a little more clear cut. He's the bad guy. Again, going back to showing the flashbacks with Sylvanas, where like you can tell he's doing something evil behind the scenes, but
Mhm.
trying to manipulate her.
Mhm.
So like the dynamic is clearer, both why she would be tricked by the jailer and also showing that he's, not just like, I wanted knowledge and, everyone else was, mean, so they put me away. Like,
Mhm.
it would be good just to be a little more clear cut on the story, I think, so far.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah. No,
but
I see your point.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's pretty clear he's going to be, a final boss coming up next, especially because, he's got his, final form armor on.
Yeah.
So,
Which
I'm
brings
sure
us to the next
something.
question: where are they
Yeah.
going?
Yeah. So, I think that they're going to, first ones, for the Tavish books, it seems like there's this place where there's one force higher than the rest, and you can,
Oh,
sort of
you're
unmake the
lagging quite a
cosmos.
bit. Let's see.
This better? I saw it flicker for a second. I'm green now though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you look and sound better now.
Yeah. So he's probably going to a place to try to unmake, change, rework part of the universe, which we've seen it's been a theme in the past. We've had Argus the Unmaker, we've had Algalon trying to reboot the world. Um and yeah, he it seems like he wants to change things, and we want to stop him from doing that.
Mhm.
The Tazavesh book makes it seem like the first ones have the power to create and destruct,
Mhm.
and that there is possibly a seventh cosmic force described as fractal, which kind of fits the vibe of all the jagged edges. um and it seems that the jailer is trying to access this force that shaped the rest, because he has the knowledge and power to unmake reality if he can control all the cosmic forces. And we've seen him. We've read about how he was trying to use the Dreadlords to um, destabilize all the other forces and turn them against each other. So it fits into his plan that he's trying to weaken all the forces, and now he's trying to go to the place of this top level fractal force and use it to rewrite reality to serve him, because he's big on everyone serving him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe his story is that he realized the Shadowlands had some problems, but
Mhm.
then along the way, he kind of got like blinded in his rage and pride. Um,
Mhm.
and that also kind of follows the path of everyone he preys upon. Like he sort of taps into their insecurities or frustration with something, and like their need for revenge or change, and then they get warped too.
Mhm.
um like even I was doing some lore slides for Limit and other places, and even researching near Zul. It's like, he had these feelings of guilt that he, sent the horde down a bad path, and that translated into him getting so absorbed in opening portals to to other
Mhm.
worlds, that he kind of lost sight of what he wanted to do, and then he got captured and became the Lich King. So there's Arthas, wanted to do the right thing. He was so, angry about Strathome. He wanted to, fight Mal'Ganis. He was just going down this other route, and it's like, oh, Sylvanas, really, wants things to be a better place, trying to help the Forsaken, vengeance against Arthas, and then
Yep.
she kind of becomes Arthas. Like there seems to be this repeating factor. Bolvar was the one that was trying to just sacrifice himself to keep things stable, and maybe that's why he has ended up on a better path than the rest. But yeah, it definitely seems like there's this trend of characters unhappy with something and then they lose themselves in their pursuit to change things or learn more. So, but yeah, why don't we discuss something else that's not this cinematic but still is tied to the encounter? And that's there's this
Yeah.
interesting dialogue that I think a lot of people missed because they were too busy with the cinematic.
Yep, I missed it too, and it's really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's between Bolvar, Thrall, and Jaina following the end of the encounter, and it's generic, but it's generic to the point of realizing that they don't know what's going on in the cinematic. Like, we saw the cinematic, but they didn't.
Yep.
Because they're talking about a trial for Sylvanas, that they want to find Anduin, that they don't know what Sylvanas said,
Yeah, that's also
and
interesting,
that she's asleep.
specifying it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that they're gonna bring her to Oribos and hope she awakens. So that means they probably did not see her eyes change color as well. And
Because
they're
they would
talking.
comment that, right? Like they would say,
Yeah,
like, wait, what happened? What happened to her? But they're not really saying anything of that.
yeah,
Only that she said something before she collapsed, and that's really interesting.
yeah, and they see that the jailer consumed the Arbiter's essence. They comment on that. But yeah, it seems that the stuff that happened in close quarters, they are unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because they could be under the impression that, they have Sylvanas captive and she has the knowledge to help them, but there might be a trial or some force to get her to work with us. When in reality, they may be in for a surprise if she is a totally
Different
different person.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, it also sheds uncertainty on what Sylvanas was going to say, because at first I assumed Sylvanas was going to be like, oh, can't let him, aka the jailer, reach the first ones. But maybe if she has the blue eyes, and high elves are always associated with blue eyes, maybe is she like having a flashback and it's like, oh, can't have Arthas reach the Sunwell. It's like, will she even remember what is going on? Because she just
Oh
absorbed a
God, is
lot
she
of
just not
memories
gonna
at
have?
once.
Yeah, is she just not gonna have any memory at all from like a
Yeah.
decade?
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope that she has some memory. I think that would be more interesting if characters are like, okay, well,
Yeah.
you're working with us now, but like we're really unhappy with what you did in the past. So,
But you can perhaps redeem yourself if you work with us now. Maybe they are hoping that she will be that she might have some information on what the next plans are. So
yeah. And it's also interesting how it parallels Garrosh's trial arc in War Crimes. Because after Garrosh was defeated, he was put on trial in this book, and then he ended up escaping, and then that led to Warlords of Draenor. And they've tried to make parallels between Sylvanas and Garrosh. Garrosh was an amateur, or they have tried to have some parallels, but also then use them to show how they're different. So this could be another example of how their trials will go very differently. Um, I do think it would be good though to uh, let people have their say, like explain what went wrong. So I hope that's not like glossed over, or it's like oh well, the trial will happen after the jailer is defeated. Oh, Sylvanas is now locked in the Shadowlands. I guess no trial type thing.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, Sylvanas has sacrificed herself. I guess we're not gonna have a trial.
Oh no, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, hopefully it does. I'm not even. It's so hard to say after a story has been dragged on for long what would feel good, for the story progression, but I'm hoping that it will be more than just, oh, the person wasn't themselves, so it's time to forgive.
Yeah, I hope they explore the theme of justice versus vengeance more. I think that is. Hopefully, there could be some nuance. Like I said, I'm skeptical of this,
Mm-hmm.
based on the track record. But since they've been really pushing this theme that vengeance can worsen things, like,
Mm-hmm.
Uther with the Maw, Devos, Tyrande forgetting to rule her people, um, focused on Sylvanas, that maybe they could explore that angle some more. You know, I think it would be weird if they made characters out to be villains that were struggling with justice versus vengeance. If it's like, oh, Sylvanas is totally fine, but character wounded by Sylvanas, how dare you, not just, give her a puppy. I think that would be weird. But there's potential to do it well. I don't know if this is a great story arc for a video game. I kind of would want to go back to Azeroth and more character centric moments, and kind of feel like I'm impacting the story more instead of watching Sylvanas destroy something
Yeah, like just
patch.
scrolling through us or scrolling past us. Like, this is the
Yeah.
story, this is happening. Now it's the next thing. Just watching everything happen, but not being a part of it.
I feel like this would be better as a TV series or movie because it feels like some of these
Mm-hmm.
cinematics end as like season finale cliffhangers, except you don't get the TV episodes leading up to it. Like,
Yeah.
it definitely seems like we could have like a cohesive, like each expansion could almost be like a season of a TV show,
Mm-hmm.
and you need a lot more build up explaining these characters and what they're doing. It's funny because the Warcraft movie just got added to Netflix in a bunch of
Oh yeah,
regions
I
this past
heard.
week,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like this funny story problems repeating themselves,
Mm-hmm.
of the characters they choose to focus on, and like so many different threads, and it looks visually great, but it's hard to feel emotionally invested, and the characters you care about the most are the ones they build the emotional connection with, like
Mm-hmm.
Durotan and Draka. So it's sort of like, different staff, different expansion, different characters, but some of the same mistakes. And yeah, I just think the story would work a lot better as a mini series, like charting, Sylvanas's descent into
Mm-hmm.
this very warped Banshee Queen. Maybe have some flashbacks to Arthas,
I think it
maybe
actually
going
would
back
do
and
really
forth.
well as a series. I would watch that.
Yeah, and you could like get a lot of close-ups on character
Mm-hmm.
expressions and eyes. You could see some things going on. There could be a lot more cues spread
Mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
But this current, like, always ending on a cliffhanger and very thin plot, many details up in the air. Um, I'm just not sure this was the best story to center for a
Mm-hmm.
few patches.
Yeah.
Um, that said, I don't think anyone working on the game, should get death threats.
Oh no.
Many of
Yeah.
them,
That was a
even
big
if they're
thing.
like, like lead so and so, or if they worked on it directly, like they get their orders from someone. One person is not going to go rogue and like make a cinematic or be like, I have decided Sylvanas will be, in charge for
Yeah,
this
it's not
patch.
one person that decides the whole thing. It's a big process, and it doesn't even matter if it even would be just one person. It still doesn't give anyone the right
No.
to do what has actually happened with death threats and other kinds of harassment. It's just wrong. People should not do that, and I don't know why people sometimes think it's okay to do that. There's one thing to give criticism or give your opinion on things, but there is no reason to attack the devs or the writers themselves personally.
Yeah. And I also think, to a smaller extent, if you're saying that, one team, told a bad story or it was inconsistent, like, I think it's tricky because a lot of these people are told to write a story with very specific
Angles.
instructions
Yeah.
from Blizzard. And
Mm-hmm.
Blizzard's not going to say, oh, in 10 years from now, like, Sylvanas will be doing this. They're doing it based on the information available.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Blizzard's approach is kind of unfair to the creatives because Blizzard wants you to pore over all of these books to understand what's going on, but there are details that don't line up perfectly, and the person that gets the flack is the director of an old cinematic or the director of a book. They're like, oh, this person messed up this detail, or
Yeah, like told the
wrote so
story
and so
wrong.
inconsistently, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, when this person wrote the book, they didn't know what was gonna happen to her in 6 years, and maybe if Blizzard didn't force people to read these books and glean them for details that got like retcon stitched together, people wouldn't be so hyper critical of elements and they could just enjoy the story and character development. But like
Yeah.
when Blizzard is encouraging you to read a fairy tale to understand a cinematic, fans are going to read more stuff about the character, and then they'll be like, why does Sylvanas say that she's excited to be a war chief if, in this cinematic 2 years later, she's saying she hates the Horde? This doesn't make sense. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, it's because, yeah, I mean, maybe Blizzard's approach to this wasn't great, but the people creating the cinematics or the books are just following the instructions and trying to
Mm-hmm.
make something the best it can be, with the limitations they've been given.
Yeah,
So, if
because
anything,
we went through some
yeah.
details as well. The way that they're instructed to write things is not general points. It's a lot of
Mm.
very specific things that they are meant to mention, and it's not their fault if certain details weren't specified enough to make sense years and years later.
Yeah, like going back to the Edge of Night short story, like I'm pretty sure the jailer did not exist
No,
at the time of that book. Like he was
it's like
not
we're gonna talk
mentioned
about the
by
jailer, but we're not
name.
gonna mention him. You know?
Yeah, and I feel like that they've made the story work in their new timeline. But they didn't have the full arc, and I think if they did have it in mind, they would have worded the story differently to emphasize, the jailer more over the Valkyr, or like elements of uncertainty, or like manipulation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just yeah, I think that no one should get death threats.
Yeah,
I do think that there is some valid criticism of
as a
the way the
whole,
story direction is
absolutely.
being handled,
Mm-hmm.
and that feedback should be directed to the people in charge, most of whom are not like on Twitter or social media, because like they're really high up. um and so like don't try to harass down, like don't Google like narrative people, let me spam them about the story, because like they probably don't have much of a say
Yeah.
in it, and like that's not how you give feedback. Like if you're at your job and like a customer like is like, oh, I see you, let me just talk your ear off about for 4 hours about why I hate your company, you'd
Yeah.
be like, security, like help. um but yeah, I mean, I do think that I think the way to get the criticism across is to just don't do insults, don't do death threats, just try to convey, like, I understand what you're trying to do, but it's not landing for me. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
stupid. Like I understand the story beats. I understand that it's a split soul. Like yes, I've read this book, or I understand I need to read the book, but this whole the way you've handled serious topics, the way you've decided to drag the story out, it's not satisfying, even though I can logically understand the outline of what's meant to happen.
Mm-hmm. And also
And
taking it
yeah,
to like forums or other kind of
yeah,
like feedback systems within Blizzard uh, is better. Or even you can even talk about it on your own social media in general. Talking about your thoughts on your opinions, all the criticism, but just going ahead and attacking individuals who work on it. That's the part where a line has been crossed, and
yeah.
especially with
And
death threats.
I think something else to keep in mind is that while if Blizzard or investors, if they care about numbers and data, or trends, what's being talked about, if you can identify um, media that you like a film, a book, other games, like if you talk about them as well, if you look at that data collectively, it's like, well, gee, we see a lot of people talking about Sylvanas negatively, and we see them talking about this other really different, form of storytelling, and some movie that came out. Like, maybe people are more interested in this very different type of storytelling. If people, if everyone is just going to be talking about Sylvanas, Blizzard might just say, okay, well, people don't like it, but they're fixated just on her. Like, that's the only media they consume. But if you express other types of media, games, books, TV shows, all sorts of things that you like, as opposed to the Sylvana story, maybe the data will send a message that, hey, like, these other types of things are more popular. Maybe we should have latched on to that trend instead of, whatever trend we went down with Sylvanas.
Mm-hmm.
And they could, like, course correct in the future to
Mm-hmm.
focus on other things based on what other people are talking about. It's kind of like, if everyone complains about a Blizzard thing, but they only if they only like if they play World of Warcraft, hours every day, it's like the Steam meme of like, oh, this person, hated the game, but they played it for another, 10,000 hours.
Yeah, I've seen
Um,
those. It's like they
yeah,
vote it as I do not recommend this game, and then you can also
yeah.
see how many hours they have played of the game since that review, and they're still playing it so much. It's funny.
But yeah, so like, for example, if you think Marvel handles superheroes better, make sure you're expressing that, you like that other franchise for other reasons, as opposed to being like, I only consume World of Warcraft 24/7, I just like this, but I'm consuming it because, a business person's like, cool, well, I guess we're doing something right. Like, you're exclusively consuming our product.
Yep.
But if it's like, well, yeah, this is weird, I'm gonna enjoy some other fandom, then maybe Blizzard will realize that they need to make their world more compelling again through different
Mhm.
means.
Mhm. And I think that's kind of also what's happening, not necessarily lore wise, but a lot of gameplay wise with the recent hype with Final Fantasy as well
Yeah,
happening.
exactly.
I think instead of people just complaining and complaining and complaining about Blizzard, it might have not affected anything at all. But now, with this sudden surge of people who are trying out Final Fantasy and just Final Fantasy in general getting so much attention online, I think is making Blizzard, have to think about it, have to consider it, and see what they can do better for that trend to not continue and potentially have bigger consequences for the future of the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, you go on the Final Fantasy homepage, and it's not as visually impressive as Blizzard. There's no, flashy cinematic in the background, and at the very top, it's like, you know, fashion with friends, player housing, fun collectibles. And, Blizzard, meanwhile, is like, like esports, Shard of Domination. Like, it's very different. And if people just play the Blizzard game, then Blizzard's like, okay, well, clearly people like the direction we're going in. But if they see people playing a game that's like emphasizing transmog and collectibles and like casual play and more storytelling emphasis, they could go, gee, well, our audience clearly likes this thing we're not providing. That could make them change, as opposed
Yeah.
to, we just hear complaining, but everyone's playing our game 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a really good point. And like mentioning housing, for example, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
if we mention housing for 10 years if we're still playing the game, Like we're complaining, let's say, about WoW not having housing, but Blizzard is probably like, yeah, yeah, whatever, They think they want housing, but like they actually don't. But then they see that, hey, the housing aspect of Final Fantasy is actually extremely popular. And it's
Yeah.
been, part of the selling point of the game and what a lot of people are enjoying, then Blizzard has to consider it. So I think that goes with anything, whether it's gameplay, lore, or anything you do. It's always good to highlight the things that are good with other things too, instead of focusing so much on complaining about one and the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's also just healthy, if you dislike something. I think I mentioned this last week or the week before. Like, if you're unhappy with like like I personally wasn't happy with the genocide arc, and like I made a conscious effort to like find books that told stories in a way that I liked, and like that helped sharpen my opinions as to what I liked and disliked, so I was less likely to be like, yeah, this kind of sucks, but I guess I'll just, defend it all the time or put up with it. It can like really strengthen your voice,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, and you value your time more, and once you find something you really like, then you're like, well, I'm going to spend more time with this thing I like. And
Mm-hmm.
that helps you feel better, and then that also sends like a very clear consumer message to Blizzard that like, you know, you're going to spend time on the story or gameplay you like, as opposed to being miserable while making it seem you're totally fine with stuff.
Yep.
um so yeah, I mean, that's where you're at. That's very interesting situation to be in. It's kind of like we sort of happening in slow motion,
Mm-hmm.
and now it happened, and now we have the aftermath both in and out of game as to where Blizzard will go next with this.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, I just hope that they are aware that um maybe they tried to take a risk and they extended it for several years, and maybe they should try something else or learn what has um and hasn't worked with storytelling, based on response in the game and other sorts of games or narratives that are doing well. Like, can you picture? I don't think Marvel would have done as well if like Thanos didn't have spotlights on him, or the movies were spread 5 years apart instead of 1 year apart. Because it
Yeah.
kind of feels like they're trying to do a Marvel type situation, but the characters get like a few cinematics per patch, as opposed to the Black Widow film, or Infinity War, part 1 and 2. It just feels like cosmic superhero thing, but it's an
Way,
MMO, not
yeah.
movies.
It's like too diluted because it happens so seldom. So it gets a
Yeah.
bit disconnected in the feeling of it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I think that was a lot
yeah.
of lore topics. A lot of
Yeah.
Sylvanas, some Garrosh, some other parallels. And speaking of Sylvanas and the current raid, we have the Sanctum of Domination Mythic difficulty that has been unlocked today. As of today, NA has officially started the race to World First. EU
Yeah.
will closely follow up tomorrow morning.
Yeah. So it seems that the some of the bosses are not as much of a pushover as people thought. The first three did die pretty quickly, but Nerzul took a bit longer
Mm-hmm.
than the others. Um, so that's interesting to see. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think is interesting is that a Chinese guild got the first heroic Sylvanas.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's promising, because they have that delay. But maybe there'll be a competitor with Mythic, because beating US and EU to heroic Sylvanas is really interesting, especially with how buggy she's been.
Oh yeah.
Um, and yeah, I also think it's interesting. I think it's really nice how Complexity and Echo are working together to raise money for charity. Because NA versus EU can get really spicy, especially with the fans thinking that the other side has an advantage, or trying to blow up any trash talking into something major. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like politics. But I think it's really nice that they're trying to use this moment to do something together, use their combined hype to raise money for something good. So I thought that was really nice to see.
Yeah, I agree. It was actually really nice to see. And having the race to World First in general is very exciting for World of Warcraft, since we've had such a long drought of nothing happening. No patch for the longest time. 9.1 finally came back, and I think this race to World First is a large part in rejuvenating the game for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think especially for people that like doing stuff at the top level,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's great that the Twitch streams break record. It gets some more hype. They haven't had a lot of things to do for a while. Um, if you've like, built your brand on high-end stuff and then there's a long break in between, you don't
Yep.
really have, the content that, people are excited by. So, it's good that
Exactly.
that the people doing the top esports are getting their moment
Mhm.
to shine. And the production quality keeps like improving leaps and bounds every tier as there's,
Absolutely.
like now people have like analytical shows, morning shows, evening shows, apps,
Mhm.
more people raising stuff for charity, custom overlays talking about bosses. Warcraft logs has like like they're like scraping the data from their attempts. There's a stream next to like the class and spec breakdown. It's like
Everything
a
is out there.
real sporting. It's
Yeah.
really sophisticated, more so
Mhm.
than a lot of other sports, I think.
Mhm.
And it's all community driven to
Mhm.
really show the power of the community and how much people really care
Mhm.
about this.
Mhm.
So
And it's
that's all exciting.
I was gonna
But
say it's also a fun contrast to the recent football that happened, since a lot of
oh
negatives
yeah,
surrounded that with violence afterwards. So it's nice to see, what the esports scene can do with this kind of audience. I mean, obviously it's not as big of an audience as football, but still, I think it's nice to see when esport does well.
yeah. It's also interesting to see how things have evolved with, there's strategists on the side, 21st Raiders, people
Mhm.
just calling cooldowns out now. It
Mhm.
keeps getting more and more sophisticated.
Mhm.
I mean, there's always the debate about the time zones being different. I do think it would be interesting if there was like, I don't know, some sort of tournament realm or way to just focus on the strategies and not have to deal with like the misery of like
Yeah.
the split week and then like having to also be a famous streamer to leverage people donating BOEs to
Yep.
you as opposed to a different guild. It would
Mhm.
be nice to focus more on the competition and less like the meta strategy or the social
Exactly.
aspect of
Mm-hmm.
things.
Or getting
um
people who are not saved to come to heroic kills to trade weapons or whatever else
yeah.
that you might loot.
Yeah, like to me that's not like why people find the race fascinating. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
should be about like strategies, and if you want, extra strategists in the background, like cool, that's great. It's, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's more like the whole like, oh, you need
Mm-hmm.
to have someone famous so like, or like likable so they can,
Yeah,
um
have more people
'cause
offer help.
yeah. And it's not anything against a particular streamer or
Oh no,
guild. It's
absolutely
more
not.
like the barrier to entry. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you are a guild with some talent or, friends playing together and you think that you could push things, you need to do all this other organizational work to have a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be daunting
Mm-hmm.
to get fresh blood in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So
Maybe it should be a
it could be
tournament
more
realm
accessible.
where you
Yeah.
copy your character, like you snapshot copy your character on the release of 9-1.
Yeah,
And
that could be
then,
in.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's too much work though, because then people would spend time gearing on this fake realm just to compete. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
complicated. It's so
I think it's
difficult when a
worth.
game is an RPG at the same time.
I think it could be interesting if they had like a world first roundtable. Like I think Blizzard has done that with PvPers before. I
Mm.
mean, not since COVID, but if they had a roundtable with world first people being like, what does your guild enjoy? Like, what does your guild think of is like really time consuming? Uh,
Mhm.
people in like the world 5 to 10 range. Um, what do you feel like is your barrier to doing well? Like, or are you worried that you don't have enough split runs? So like, is gear a factor to your rank? Like, I think, or is there something Blizzard could do to make things better?
Like
Um,
to open a conversation.
yeah, I think,
Mhm.
because you don't want Blizzard to be like, okay, we've done a tournament realm where people are like, okay, well, now we have these other issues that no one
Yeah.
thought of, and then it's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would be good to I definitely think as stuff gets more money invested in it, more
Especially
viewers,
that too.
China trying to make a stand,
To
China
make
is
it
like
more
such a big
fair.
part of Blizzard's, viewership, and it feels bad knowing that they're always going to have this disadvantage. So,
Because it
uh,
definitely does sort of block, like you said, any kind of new talents to even have a chance at this.
yeah, and I mean, in addition to the NA versus EU times, there's also the issue of like hot fixes
Mm-hmm.
that can buff or nerf things, and we kind of
Mm-hmm.
saw that even to a minor extent with heroic Sylvanas, how when Blizzard made some fixes to heroic Sylvanas, it actually made things more difficult because things were out of sync,
Yeah.
and very few guilds killed it. So you don't want someone to say, oh, okay, like we got to this first, and then we found all these bugs, or based on our time zone, uh the bugs were fixed overnight before we pulled the boss, so we got it, we benefited from this, we didn't waste time on the buggy boss. Like there's a lot of timing things I think could be
Mm-hmm.
uh with when hot fixes go out, that could be mitigated if there was like a central start time for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
um and yeah, a lot of the time it seems, I mean, based on our traffic, like we have these undocumented hotfixes that go out and people are like, whoa, like we didn't know. And you're just like,
Yeah.
it's like, well, I'm
Yeah.
glad WoW had set up this, elaborate system and nice UI
So
to
you can
show
see
all the
everything. Mm-hmm.
unannounced hotfixes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it makes you wonder, um, what would happen if we didn't have that sort of tool.
Mm-hmm.
How would communication be if, an
Mm-hmm.
encounter was changed and not everyone knew about it?
I think Blizzard is
Um,
probably thinking about all this already,
yeah,
and
yeah.
are just trying to figure out the best thing is. Because another thing is, if it is a launch at the same time, what is a fair time? Because for some people it would be morning, for some people it would be evening, for some people it would be
Well,
lunchtime.
it is true, but for Limit, I think they went to England, I think,
That
for
one time.
Ashara.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I feel like,
Oh, you mean
I
if they
mean,
would invite everyone?
yeah, or I mean, I feel like if there was one time zone that made sense, if a place had enough sponsors, they'd be like, everyone, travel a few days before, sleep, do tourist stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if sponsors would love that, like here's our people, walking around, doing IRL streams or whatever, and then turn it into a full-fledged trip somewhere to a time zone they think is more appropriate.
That could work, and I mean they could also adjust their own time zone, I suppose, wherever they're
Yeah,
living as well. Like
yeah,
if
that's
in
true.
if in NA it would be maybe morning, let's say 8 a.m., and then for EU it would be in the afternoon. Then I guess the people in EU could continue sleeping until midday, just to make
Yeah,
it as worth
and
as
there's enough
possible.
time before this goes live that you could adjust your schedule
Yeah,
in
exactly.
advance.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think that as this race keeps growing in sophistication,
Mhm.
more so than BFA,
Mhm.
Blizzard might need to think about this
Mhm. Yeah.
more seriously.
Mm-hmm. And they probably are. I mean, we've had some updates and changes to the esports scene for MDI, for example. We had the
Yeah,
complete,
that was
or
good.
not for MDI, for Mythic Plus, because we had that brand new mode which was introduced,
Mm.
the Great Push, and then we had, I think there was another announcement of some kind of change at some
Oh
point.
yeah, for season 2 MDI, they're really streamlining it and they're doing away with the the old cup
Oh
format.
yeah, 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 yeah. The format
So it
change.
shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be as much
Mm-hmm.
time and spread out as much of a time commitment.
Yeah.
So I think that is a step in the
Those
right
are good
direction.
signs. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would seem to me then that they are definitely trying to make something a bit more streamlined, a bit more make sense and fair for everyone. I think they just haven't thought of a good solution yet.
Yeah, maybe maybe they figured that with COVID disrupting lots of things, this was, I don't know, it could be like more on the back burner because
Oh yeah, yeah,
IRL
yeah.
were like going to be
Because
less
no
of
one's
a
gonna
thing or
travel
up
anyways.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like when maybe they'll think about it more if the potential for like big in-person events,
Mm-hmm.
is back.
Yeah, maybe for next time, for next event. The next race to world first.
One minor thing I
Mhm.
wanted to highlight about the raid quickly was that there was like lots of discussion about shards and weapons, lots of technical things, but something very interesting that I think could be, we always talk about like transmog hints that lead to the next big craze.
Mhm.
Uh, they've made a weapon that you can adjust, and that means that it can be on your back or at your hip. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's really cool how for transmog, I think that opens up a lot of opportunities because previously, you were stuck with weapon that just went into one place.
Mhm. Like weapons had
Uh,
one position, and that's what it is. No changes, and this does indeed bring some more potential for future weapons to have more varieties. So having the same item but having different looks.
yeah, and we've talked about it in the past how like there's a backpack with recruit a friend, and then there are more backpacks in A3, and then there are interesting Covenant back pieces in Shadowlands. Like they
Mhm.
start small, and then they use that tech for more things.
Mhm.
So I think that this weapon changing position could lead to a more weapons changing position, but uh, also just more customization for positioning stuff in general.
Yeah.
I
Like.
think that
Mhm.
it's a good step. Going
More
back to
more
also Final
possibilities.
Fantasy
Yeah.
advertising fashion on their front page. Maybe Blizzard is realizing that hey, appearances are
Important.
something
Mhm.
people care about. So
Yeah, this weapon stance, being able to change how your weapon sits on you, reminds me of in Final Fantasy. There's an option where not on every single item, but on many headpieces, you can decide how to wear it. So, for example, if they're glasses, you can decide to wear them like normally, like how you would like on your nose, like just wearing it properly, or you could put it to go up on your hair. And
yeah,
so it kind of reminds me of that, where it's the same item, but it's got like multiple ways of using it. So it's cool to see that they're using some kind of tech like that for the weapons to start with. Or
yeah.
actually,
I
like
think it,
you can't even just call it to start with either, because that's actually big. Like a weapon is a big deal, so it's really cool to see it with weapons.
it could also, I mean, if they extended that to how it looks in combat as well, like they made such a big deal of, improving combat visual effects. But sometimes people are like, oh, like I wish this weapon, stayed on my back. Like, sometimes you see casters and they're attacking and they're holding their staff. They're,
Oh yeah.
hitting something this does this make sense? So it could be interesting if you could um control your weapons placement in combat as well, or have slightly different stances, like reflecting your, I don't know, personality with them.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does give up very different looks if it's at your side versus, on your back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely gives a different attitude feeling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope they do more with this. And if you're like, oh, this looks familiar, um, this weapon is like a high definition version of the ones from Naxxramas, the Hungering Cold and Slayer of the Lifeless, and it's the basic model was in that South Park episode. So it's like kind of like a
Oh
tribute
yeah.
to that original Naxxramas weapon, just looking a lot nicer now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Having little
Yeah.
references like that. And
So
last
yeah.
but not least for today, we have some merch from Blizzard.
Yeah.
And if you guys remember at the very beginning of the show, we mentioned that there was a slight teasing of a particular Pepe, and now we get to show you guys what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting Pepe
So
out.
yeah, it's like visual comparison here.
Mm-hmm.
So Blizzard announced they always announce like more art every month, and the art for this month is not WoW focused, but it's kind of ironic because there's a Kerrigan art print and it's like Sylvanas Kerrigan comparisons. But they put up a teaser on their website, said check back for new exciting products July 23rd through 25th. And they had this silhouette of something that looks like a box. and something that looks like Pepe because we've got the little pointy head and the
Mm-hmm.
round head,
Mm-hmm.
and
I don't think it could be
kind of
anything else. I think it's definitely
spiky
Pepe.
sides. So I hope we're getting another Pepe.
Yeah,
What do you think it could be?
I think it's definitely Pepe. And I think the creature beside Pepe also looks like some kind of character of sorts because I don't know, it looks like ears to me.
Yeah, I don't. I mean,
I'm
that's
not
harder to
sure
pick
though.
out, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
we
harder
are
to
getting
pick
the
out.
Covenant Pepes in 9-1, so maybe the timing of this lines up with when people can get the Covenant Pepes. That would be really cute.
Mm. Oh, maybe there'll be 4 different kinds for sale then.
That'd be really cute. Like, I mean, I know they for a while they were like not really um
Doing plushies.
into Pepe. Like they
Mm-hmm.
were not really doing plushies in general. The
Mm-hmm.
Pepes went out of stock. But in
Mm-hmm.
Shadowlands, they've been creeping back in. I think even in the YouTube thumbnails for some of like the lo-fi remixes, there was like a Pepe chilling in the
Ah.
Bastion one.
Yeah.
So, um yeah, I definitely think we need more cute Pepes. Always a fan of plushies that you can actually hug that aren't just like I'm big and I have to be in
Mm-hmm.
a box. And,
Mm-hmm.
Um there was also kind of strange timing. Well, yes and no. There was a Sylvanas like a very elaborate posable figurine and it comes with her legendary bow and 2 different faceplates for her regular mode and banshee mode. But they both have the red eyes. So I'm just like, oh, like, shouldn't there have been a blue eyes, or is that just, temporary? Um,
Ah, good point.
but
Yeah, there should have been a blue version actually. I think that would have.
but I do
Yeah.
think the actual statue's kind of cute, and there's a lot
It's
of
really
posable
cute. I
parts.
love it.
Yeah, like I think it's cool how you can, move the bow, or you
Mm-hmm.
can put her little banshee smoke on her arms, or change her face expression.
Mm-hmm.
It looks really cute. It's just the timing of it with the cinematic. I'm just like, see, like
Yeah.
people want this character to be interesting. Like you can do a lot of potential, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but yeah, I
Yeah.
think the figurine itself is pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, I think it's really
and
cute. It's very well made.
yeah, so but yeah,
Yeah.
fingers crossed we get some interesting merch for SDCC
Mm-hmm.
on July 23rd.
Yep.
So
And that's about it for today's show. How nice that we
yeah,
started with Sylvanas talk and then we ended with a Sylvanas little figurine. How
yeah.
poetic.
So yeah, I think we're about done with the show.
Yep.
I have no idea where Brightpaw is.
Yep.
But yeah. I'm not sure if we'll do a show next week, if it will just be like Race to World First stuff, because if it goes by fast, it might be when people are on Sylvanas. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll keep you
Hopefully
guys
we'll have,
posted.
yeah.
You can follow our Twitters, Wowhead on Twitter, Fuchsia on Twitter, Perculia on Twitter. We always tweet out the shows so that you
Yep.
know that we are going live. And you can also feel free to follow the channel here on Twitch. And these shows always do get uploaded onto YouTube as well. So if you happen to miss the time that these shows are on, you can always rewatch them later on YouTube. And
Yeah.
that's it from us. Ready for a high five?
Yep, I'm good for the high five. So yeah, let's do
Yeah.
it. 3, 2, 1.
Way. Oh, and I love that you started a chant. I've never used this
Oh,
feature on Twitch.
oh wow. That's cool.
That's so cool. Yeah, thank you guys so much for
Yeah,
watching. Also, a last second shout out to Aegis who actually resubbed today
yeah.
for 42
Awesome.
months in a row, and also shout out for all the helping that Aegis does behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, he really is. He's helping a lot. Thank you to everyone for supporting and watching the show, and we'll see you all perhaps next week, or at least next show. See you next show.
Yeah.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.